So just a reminder, when you're writing code for these AP questions, sometimes they give you a method that you have to call, and also just don't get lost reading the question. So got a great example of both those things here from 2009. This is the first question on 2009's test, and they tell a little story here about a statistician and stuff. I'd say skim through it at least on your first reading, and then if you feel you missed something, go back and read more about it. But bottom line here is we got a class. It's called NumberCube. It's a user-defined class, and it has one method. So these are the things we need to be picking up on when we read these questions, okay? I mean, why did they give us this class? Well, obviously, we're going to see a NumberCube object at some point, and we're probably going to have to toss it. So when you toss a NumberCube, you get back a number. They tell us it's between 1 and 6. They don't really tell us the rules for that, though. So, like, I don't know that it produces 1s as frequently as it does 6s in the long run. I mean, they didn't really say that. So this is important. You've got to use this method. This is not like, if they say implementation not shown, they're not telling you to implement it. They're not telling you to make your own toss method. They're just saying, here it is. This is what it does. You got to use it. So in this problem, if you write math.random, you're doing it wrong. Okay, that's the bottom line. I hope everyone understands that. There's no correct answer that goes through math.random. We have to trust this toss method, and we have to understand that if they give us a NumberCube object, that it can call this method. And sure enough, that happens in part A. So in part A, they hand us a NumberCube object. It's called cube. Remember, that's a NumberCube, so it has a toss method. So cube.toss would be a valid statement, and it would give you back an integer, and no parameters are required. And then they give me a number of tosses that they desire. I need to store those tosses in order into a one-dimensional int array. There's no mention of an int array anywhere in this problem. There's not like an instance field. They didn't hand one to the method as a parameter. So I'm going to have to make it. So that's probably the first thing I would do in part A. NumTosses serves as the array's length. So the very first thing I'm going to do in part A is I'm going to make an integer array. And, maybe you call it tosses or whatever. The name of the array is not important. But all arrays need a dimension. And again, that's where NumTosses comes into play. Okay? So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create that array. Last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to return it. In the middle, I've got to go through and start assigning toss values into that array. So we'll need indexes to be able to initialize the array with values. Start at 0. You could either run this off of NumTosses or off of tosses.length. They should have the exact same value, so it really shouldn't matter. And then we'll just go one at a time. All right, all I need to do in this loop is simply assign one toss per array slot. So tosses bracket I gets assigned from the cube one toss method result. Again, if you write math.random here, it does not matter if your code produces 1 through 6s randomly as integers. You're still going to lose points. You have to use the toss method. That's the whole reason that they gave it to you. Okay, so make sure to be careful. Always use existing methods if they're provided. All right, so that was part A. Part A was pretty straightforward as long as we understood that a little bit about the toss method. Part B is definitely a lot more challenging here. They want us to look at an array of tosses, like the one that we just generated, and find the starting index of the longest run. So in this example that they gave us here, a run would be like when there's 2 5s in a row starting at index 1, there's 4 2s in a row starting at index 6, later there's 2 3s, and then there's 4 5s in a row. So there's actually a tie in this array. It could have been the 4 5s in a row or the 4 2s, and they tell us that we can return either starting index. So either 6 or 14 could be a valid return here, and that happens sometimes. We get more than one possibility. That's okay. So looking at this problem, they hand you the array. You do not need to generate it. It comes in, it's got its values. We just got to go through those values and find where the longest run is. So we're going to need 4 variables is what I figure. two variables are going to be used to track the maximum run length, okay, because that's very important. We have to find the length of the longest run to save for later comparisons. And we'll also have to know where did that run begin. So which index did it start at? Where did it start at, and how long is it? And then we'll need two more variables for comparison's sake, so that like as we find future runs, we can compare back to what we previously thought was the maximum run length. So right now, run length maximum is 4. Well, let's say this array was bigger, and then later on there was a run length of size 7. I would have to verify that 7 was bigger than any pre-existing run length. And then if it was, I would reset that max run length value. I would also want to reset the max run length index so that I knew where it was, because later I'm going to have to give that as an answer. And in a case where there's never a run, so you never even see two values in a row that are the same, we return -1. Anytime we start doing side-by-side comparisons in an array, we got to be careful that we don't go out of bounds. Okay? So I wrote an answer here where I nested a while loop inside of my for loop. There's definitely ways to avoid doing that. You could run with one single loop, but to me, I think this answer here is probably going to be the easiest for most of you to consider. So here's the two outside variables I set up. Okay, max run start, max run length. Okay, why did I initialize those values? Well, I initialized max run start to -1 so that in the event that I never do find a run, I'll be left with -1 in the end, which is what they said I should return in the case that there aren't any runs. They don't want me to return 0. They want me to return a fictitious value like -1. And I set the max run length up to be 1. That way, I'll only consider resetting these values if I find a run of length 2 or more, because I'll have to beat the length 1 that I've initially started with. So in my for loop here, I've gone ahead and I've walked across the entire array. We could definitely back this up a little bit here, like we could trim one off, but I've gone ahead and protected my inside loop, so I didn't really worry about it here. Now inside the loop, I've set up two local variables, current run start and current run length. My current run start is going to begin wherever the for loop takes me. So if I'm entering the index of the array at 7, that's where I'll potentially see a run start. And I haven't established any run length yet, so I've gone to 0. Okay, so I'm going to have to see, for example, two values next to each other to give me a run length of something. Okay, and then, all right, and so while I plus 1 is less than values.length, okay, that's going to short circuit if we get to the end of the array and there's not a comparison left, because I want to look at two values side by side. All right, so those two values side by side requires me to stop one shy of the ending index of the array. And again, I could reflect that here, but I didn't really feel that it mattered. If I see this here and they're equal, that constitutes the beginning of a run. So now I have one run made. I mean, I guess you could start your current run length at 1 and let it go up, and then you take off the equals here. But I don't know, I guess that's just arbitrary. So if we started this at 1, we would want to take off the equals here. Now we have a length 2 run. Okay, but again, as long as you're consistent, I don't think it should really matter. I also have to progress the index because I'm going to be stuck in this while loop now until one of two things happens. I'm going to be stuck in this while loop until I get to the very end of the array or until my consecutive streak cancels, right? So when I get to a place where I don't have a run anymore, then the while loop's going to break. When the while loop breaks, I want to know, did I surpass any previous runs of length? And if I did, then I need to reset both of those max trackers. I need to keep track of the length to compare for future runs, and I need to keep track of the starting index because ultimately that's what I'm looking to return. So I gave it a couple of preset test cases. One matched the one in the directions where you're allowed to either return 6 or 14. Another one, I gave it an array that didn't have any sequences, any runs. So we get back -1. And now this one here, you have to kind of just look on your own. So like for me, I see a run of 3 1s there. That is in fact the longest run of that randomly generated array. And that did begin at index 4, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. That 1 is at index 4. Every time you run the code, you should get a different randomly generated array sequence. So index 12, I'm going to guess that's probably the start of those 6s, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, okay. So that run of length 2 there, those 2 6s in a row came back index 12. And you know, you can run this a few times. There's definitely other ways to write this answer, okay? And you might want to try writing an answer that does not have a nested loop, that maybe just tracks the previous value and resets it when runs don't break, or runs do break. So, you know, but if you want to try writing some different answers, I think that's a great idea. So remember, I gave you a link to all the solutions. So by the way, here's one where my randomly generated array didn't have any consecutive values. So remember, I gave you a link at the start of all this from Skylit that has answers to all of these questions. And I believe their question does not have a nested loop, their answer. So like, here's an example of code that you could write that did not use a nested loop. I'm sure you could find other solutions online. You could try writing your own, but there's nothing wrong with using a nested loop like I did. Okay, so if you don't know, now you know.